promising practices in fostering workplaces that are inclusive of immigrants. We have, as I mentioned, scheduled time for Q&A at the end of our panel discussion. Please feel free at that time, once again, to either raise your hand or pop your questions into the chat. Before we get to the panel, we're going to invite you to participate in a few polls just to get us sort of warmed up, talking a little bit about those myths around hiring immigrants. And Lorena, I'm going to ask you if you could pop up the polls and read those questions.
Okay. Number 1, immigrants take jobs away from Canadian citizens, making it hard for Canadians to find jobs. Is that true or false? Number 2, immigrants need a special work permit or visa. And number 3, refugee claimants are not allowed to work. So feel free to answer. %. We'll wait a few more seconds. Okay, we're going to end the poll right now. So number 1, 94% said false. Number 2, 53% said true. And number 3, 85% said false. Okay, I'm going to go with the next poll for you. Other myths about hiring immigrants. Number 1, international students can only work while they are studying. True or false? Number 2, temporary foreign workers compete directly with Canadian for jobs. And number 3, I need a labor market impact assessment, LMIA, to hire someone who is in Canada on a visa. Going to wait a couple more seconds, a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the poll right now. So number 1, 61% said false. Number 2, 61% said false. And number 3, 82% said false.
Thank you, Lorena. So we actually, of course, we know the answers to these questions because we have a brief that, once again, we're going to share the address, the link with you in a moment. And of course, we've got Warren here to help us answer and address some of those questions that you just talked about, and the employers who we have here on the panel. So without further ado, I'm going to actually move to our panel. And instead of me taking time to introduce our speakers, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves really, really briefly, introduce themselves and their organization. So Brenda, if I could start with you.
There, I think I'm off on mute. So pleased to see everyone here today. I'm Brenda Pastrick. I'm the president of North Forge Innovations. North Forge is a software development company in the network communications industry. And we've been in business for 16 years, providing consulting services to original equipment manufacturers who are developing equipment for the 5G network. And the work we do ultimately improves the performance of the downloads you get from the internet and the quality of your video streaming, addressing latency and synchronization issues. We're a global company with 3 development centers in the Outaouais, in Montreal, and in Tel Aviv. And we have customers throughout the world in North America, Europe, Middle East, and Asia. And thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. Thanks, Brenda. Michaela, can we go to you next?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Kelly. I'm Michaela McBean. I work at Payments Canada, Payments Canada is a small to medium-sized company of 250 people with offices in Ottawa and Toronto, which are barely populated currently. Payments Canada actually operates national critical payments infrastructure for the banking system. And my role at the company is responsible for people and culture and our facilities. So the topic today is very relevant for me on a daily basis, and it certainly is my pleasure to be part of this panel.
Thank you so, so much. And once again, thank you for joining us. Louise, could we go to you next? Louise Sando.
Hi, so I am co-president of Sander Geophysics. The other co-president is my brother, Stefan. We're a company of about somewhat over 100 employees. We're based at the Ottawa airport. We have offices and hangar there. So what we do is airborne geophysical exploration. So we are hired by big mining companies, oil and gas, environmental work, governments. And we bring our small aircraft to all over the world to do surveys for whatever sort of resources they're looking for, or for research or general mapping, general geological mapping. We do work all over the world. We've worked on every single continent, including Antarctica. And so when we do projects, we send our small aircraft and a crew of employees, and they acquire the data there, bring it back to Ottawa, where we process the data here, and then deliver that to our clients.
Thank you, Louise. And last but certainly not least, Warren, could you introduce yourself for us?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Warren Creetz. I'm a lawyer and partner with the Ottawa law firm of Purley Robertson. I worked with others to produce the Mythbusters document, which was, I think, Kelly, it was yours and others' ideas to produce this. So I want to give you great credit on the onset here of doing it. I think the outcome that we're launching it today and the content of it is marvelous. I'm part of the panel because I'm here to answer questions that might arise based on the document and other questions too. I'm in my law practice. I've been at it for 34 years. I used to be a Government of Canada, Department of Justice lawyer doing immigration work. I was posted with the Immigration and Refugee Board as in-house counsel there. I lived and worked in Malaysia. I lived and worked in South Korea, managing law firms that were doing business immigration cases to Canada. I'm certified by the Law Society as a specialist in the combined areas of immigration, citizenship, and refugee law. And just came out of a hearing that was very successful. So I'm happy to have been dismissed from the hearing with a victory and be able to get here on time to share the conversations that we're going to have this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Warren. And I'm going to invite now, briefly, for all of our employers to talk to us a little bit about what the biggest reason is to you that diversity and equity and immigrant inclusion are important to your own organizations. And maybe we'll go sort of backwards. So Louise, if you could start us off.
Sure. So I didn't really mention this before, but our company's been around for over 60 years, and it was started by my father, who was an immigrant from Germany. He came over just after the Second World War. So obviously immigration is important in that my father started the company here as an immigrant. In the sort of very hard facet that it's important to us to have people that have experience working all around the world, because it gives us a greater insight into some of the countries that we are working in. So having different cultures, religions, and so on in our company, the diversity helps us with our projects in a softer manner. You know, our company we try to keep a sort of a family type culture in our company, and the diversity helps to sort of foster this family, having a diverse family, I guess, culture in the company.
Thank you. And Michaela, you started to allude this, but I'll ask you to address this further.
Yeah, certainly. For me, two things come to mind. First, and for Payments Canada, we're in the midst of a multi-year, multi-million-dollar modernization program to revitalize our payment systems. And the payment systems that we operate are quite complex and have broad tentacles in the payments industry. And to modernize them is quite a significant endeavor. In order for us to really deliver world-class payment systems, we actually need talent that has international payments experience. So the modernizing of payment systems to the scale we're doing does not happen every day. And we need to learn from people with international experience, the lessons they've learned, what worked, what didn't work. So specifically, the international payments expertise is what we need. But more broadly, from an organizational standpoint, even without having to build world-class systems, we really need, to meet every business goal, truly, we need talent that is diverse in thought, has different backgrounds, different experiences. We truly believe that with that comes creativity, innovation, and a competitive edge. So certainly it's helping the fuel the development of our modernization program, but just in idea creation and continuous improvement, we feel that that level of diversity is needed.
Thank you, Michaela. Brenda, over to you.
Well, I think there's a common theme that we're hearing about expertise and innovation that's brought in from abroad. And at North Forge, we work with disruptive technologies that really require niche expertise. And we have found, especially in the tech sector, that this expertise is very rare and hard to find. And so therefore, we have been going across the globe to find the best and the brightest. And over the past 8 years, we've hired more than 40 immigrants across from several different countries and many different diverse cultures. And this diversity in our organization makes it so extremely important that we create a culture of mutual trust and inclusion in order to foster employee engagement and effective collaboration. And like Louise indicated, we also at North Forge create a family atmosphere, and it is a family of a diverse group of people. And it's very, very important to creating the culture of who we are today as a company.
Brenda, thank you. And Warren, I'm going to go over to you with a slightly different twist, but similar. And if you can talk to us a little bit about why you think, or what you think is the biggest reason that immigration is important to the economy in Canada. And you're muted, Warren.
There we go. What I hear from, well, both clients as well as others, employees, but people that choose Canada for lifestyle reasons is, well, what you've heard already, the need, well, what's underfoot for a generation now in Canada or more is a significant change in the demography of our country. And some of it's based on a recognition that our fertility rate is below replacement. We've got a live birth rate of 1.2 and 2.1 is replacement. So we've got governments, provincial, federal, and all parties, including those in opposition, that realize that we've got to we're in a bit of a crisis. The ship is heading for a shoal, a rocky shoal, and immigration is part of the solution to replacing our numbers. Forget about adding to them. People think that with numbers of 350,000 a year, we're going to, grow the population. Well, it's a combined effort. It's training, it's live fertility, it's immigration, and more that's going to do this. But as other speakers before me have now just said, the diversity of ideas, the talent that gets recruited at zero cost, really, to Canada. These are people that have been they've been born, raised, primary school, secondary school, post-secondary school, all of it outside of Canada at great cost to build that asset by others in other countries. And we get to recruit what we want. Companies get to choose who they want. The federal government and the provincial governments get to select, using a point system, the skills, the resources, the talent that meets the not just immediate demand, but what's forecasted to be the demand. And the narrative in Canada, alluded to by Kelly, on the 30th of October, the Minister of Immigration gave recognition to what COVID has done to decline our immigration numbers from what the forecast, what the project, what the plan was. Inefficiencies, lack of productivity, closed borders, and so forth have compromised the plan. So for the next 3 years, there will be a growth plan to increase more than 15% every stream of immigration that comprises our dual or joint federal and provincial programs. Now, why is this important? Why is this valuable? Why is this useful? Well, the cities particularly benefit from immigration, high immigration numbers. Companies do, economies do, labor market does. And instead of viewing immigration as a threat, which sometimes happens even in Canada, in rural Canada particularly, but south of the border, the narrative in the States is all too often, has been at least, a negative thing, that immigrants are taking jobs, they experience a higher crime rate, they're on social assistance at greater numbers than the host community. All of that is not true, at least in the experience of Canada. And we as a country, 80%, are the numbers, embrace robust immigration numbers. And why? Because we've seen the benefits of it. We've experienced, we've shared. Our neighborhoods, our communities, our employers, our governments, the healthcare system, and beyond have been massive beneficiaries of the talent that's been recruited. And why are these large numbers coming to Canada? Because of peace, order, and good government. POG, peace, order, and good government. We've got a stable country. We've got a country that embraces immigration, diversity. And many people in the world are fed up with their governments or their communities, and they choose to come here. Those courageous ones who can make the trip, start over again, have jobs to come to, they do very well here. And hats off to them that have made those choices. And by all accounts, Canada is the beneficiary from these large flows, which is the largest per capita immigration rates in the Western world, are those of Canada in the last. Mulroney started it as a you wouldn't think that a conservative government would do so, but Mulroney started the big numbers, and every government, every regime, every party since has done the same.
Thank you, Warren. Back over to our employers now for a moment, and posing to you that the world has obviously changed. Our world has obviously changed significantly since your organization was recognized with a Employer Excellence Award from Hire Immigrants Ottawa last March. Can you talk to us a little bit about how things have shifted in your organization, specifically related to immigrant inclusion, and in terms of the work that you're doing around diversity and equity and inclusion in your organizations? And Michaela, this time we'll start with you.
Sure, thanks, Kelly. So yeah, the world has changed, certainly as of March, and two things kind of happening in parallel at our organization. With the onset of COVID, we had a hiring freeze, and we really slowed our recruitment. And that's one of the avenues that we diversify. So we were forced to kind of slow that process. And so what we did was we pivoted and we doubled down on awareness, our awareness campaign around diversity and inclusion internally. So we took that as an opportunity to really get our people talking about diversity, broadening the awareness. And we had some really good, thoughtful, open dialogue amongst our employee group over the last several months. The other thing we did is we doubled down on our data. We matured our data tracking so we could really understand the gaps in our workforce and where we needed to build from a diversity perspective. And that the outcome of that will be targets set for next year for recruiting. Thankfully, our recruiting is picked back up after the initial freeze. But you know, the time kind of let us dig in deep, be thoughtful, intentional about inclusion within our own workforce, and we also fast-tracked our diversity and inclusion strategy, which we had only intended to launch next year. In parallel to all that, we had a record number, which I'm sure was similar for other employees, record number of employees. International employees looking to leave either the province or the country to be with their family during the period. So we worked really hard to make sure that we could accommodate cases to allow families and employees to reunite with their families, and made sure that our policies were flexible enough for that in a temporary kind of fashion. So those two things happening at the same time, and hopefully things will start to get back to whatever normal may be, but new normal in 2021.
Thank you, Michaela. Louise, same question to you. How has diversity and inclusion work in your organization changed?
Well, I'm afraid I don't really have a good story here. Our business, our revenue generating projects are all away from our base. So if the majority of them are international, and other ones are mainly in Northern Canada and so on. So we've really been unable to do a lot of the work that we would normally do. We have had a few projects that we've been able to work on, but really, you know, currently we have 4 projects lined up in the United States that we're not willing to go to. I think we possibly could, but you know, it's not a place that we want to send our employees. So that being said, obviously we're not hiring. We have laid off a number of our employees, and the remaining one, many of them are working less than full time. So we, you know, we're not hiring. Obviously, we're not doing any in-person company activities. So it hasn't really, you know, I guess we're just clinging on. That's all I can say, clinging to try and keep our business going, which so far we're doing fine, you know, with the measures that we've taken and with the government wage subsidies and rent subsidies and so on, which have kept our company alive. So as far as programs for diversity or immigration, it hasn't really been something that has been played much of a factor since in the last, you know, since March.
Now, Louise, and we appreciate you sharing what is the reality for so many organizations as we're in the midst of this pandemic. So we appreciate that. Absolutely. Brenda.
Well, yes, I truly, my heart goes out to you, Louise. It's not easy dealing with those types of situations. Ours has been a different experience. We were in the midst of bringing on some international hires just as the pandemic came on. And some of those got stalled, but we were able to get a couple of people in just before the lockdowns happened. What that meant, though, is they arrived and they couldn't go to the office physically. Now we're in lockdown, and it's a whole different experience for new immigrants joining and getting oriented when they can't meet physically face-to-face with their colleagues. So we've been addressing that by substituting other ways of keeping everyone connected. We're promoting frequent video meetings, remote social chats. We still have the buddy system, but as opposed to being in person, they're reaching out remotely to their buddy, usually within their own culture, and doing our best to keep everyone connected, despite the fact that it's through Zoom and other facilities. We're still continuing to recruit throughout the pandemic. They just get put in a line waiting for ability to be processed through the system. But overall, it's not slowed down our strategies. We've just had to adapt them.
Thank you, Brenda. Warren, you started to allude to this a little bit in your earlier remarks, but I'm wondering if you could expand just a little bit on how immigration has been impacted by COVID and how you see our capacity as a nation to actually ramp up in the way that the government has sort of suggested they want to in the next couple of years.
Well, one of the pure joys of being an immigration lawyer is how constant the rules change. And it's partly politics, it's partly judicial decisions, legislative changes, and so forth. But what happened in March, of course, was the Quarantine Act suddenly was employed by Cabinet to put a stop on most travel. And what I had to do was to, as I said, one of the pure joys of immigration law is trying to figure out how clients are able to find solutions within the rules or around the rules. And the Quarantine Act is something I'd never heard of or had to pay attention to in the 34 years I've been an immigration lawyer. But suddenly we had to get it. We had to understand it. We had to figure out all the orders in council that had been passed by Cabinet pursuant to the Quarantine Act. And also which companies, which sectors are considered to be essential service providers and operating in something called critical infrastructure. So we had to learn all those rules, and representing companies that wanted to carry on business by exporting not just products, but bringing in, let's say, to Canada, technicians and others who were involved in after sales service and other facets of their business, to get them exempted from the travel restriction so that we got them declared as essential service providers, and in some cases exempted from the Quarantine Act so that they didn't even have to quarantine for those 14 days. It's very expensive for companies to have their staff or their visiting staff or the vendor spend 14 days in a hotel waiting for the 14-day clock to tick through so that they can do the installation, the calibration, whatever's required involving the after-sales service of the delivery of the machinery, we'll call it. So that's been very exciting. I've enjoyed that. I've really, really enjoyed that. And clients that I've represented have worked with me on, pulling the trigger on putting together the documentation that's required to get the exemptions from the travel restrictions and from the Quarantine Act. So that's an immediate thing. That's the good news, I'll call it. The less good news is because the borders are more secure, there's anxiety with officers. Processing of the routine immigration applications, permanent residence, work permits, these kinds of things, has slowed. It's more inefficient. It's less productive. So we're not seeing the turnaround time in cases that could have been processed, let's say at the Ottawa airport, and airports on a NAFTA case, now the new agreement, those are harder and they take longer because we have to do them online. So what could have been approved in 45 minutes at an airport on an inbound worker, intercompany transfer by way of example, now has to be done online and can take months to do. So it's slowed down considerably. Permanent resident applications slowed down. The government has recognized all this and they want to ramp it up and are working at doing just that. They know that they can't be on the sidelines and watch this unfold without a steady hand on the tiller. So those are some of the immediate things. Of course, the anxiety level of clients, particularly family members trying to reunite, very high. It's very difficult. But getting the exemptions, we apply online to get a travel authorization, what's called a written travel authorization to have family members reunite in Canada. That's exciting because we get replies in less than 72 hours usually, which is a written approval. The person gets an ETA, electronic travel authorization, can come. I'm looking at Dave and I'm thinking about his mandate with Algonquin College. You know, the international students have been, and their colleges and post-secondary institutions have all been affected by this. And the government was rather slow to implement measures and agree to protocols that would allow for international students who had their approvals given after March 18th to come to Canada. But now I think that's opening up. So the colleges, the universities may have been prejudiced or compromised by this semester, but hopefully there'll be some catch up. There was a good article in, I think it was yesterday's Globe and Mail, about post-secondary education and the international students. I mean, it's a popular sector, education, and we gotta make sure that the colleges and universities are fueled with these international students. They're very important, not just for the revenue that comes to these schools, but as a pathway for immigration. They do well in school, they get postgraduate work permits, they want to stay here. We have selected them, they have selected us. They become the best, by many measures, the best immigrants because they've been credentialed here, they've been employed here, and they want to stay here. They've chosen us after both of those things, the education and the employment. So that is critical to the long-term success of our immigration multiple programs, is that we have robust international students who have good outcomes in our colleges and universities.
Thank you, Warren. And I want to switch a little bit now over to the sort of overarching theme of our event today, where we're talking about some of the myths that we know people have about immigrants and immigration. And I'm going to put our employers on the spot again and ask each of you if you would talk about a myth, because you are employers of immigrants and have been recognized for that. A myth that you hear or sense about employing immigrants, and what you would say to that, how you would respond to that. And Brenda, I'll start with you this time.
Sure. I guess the most common
Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I think I'm off mute. The most common myth that I think we hear is that it's cumbersome and difficult for Canadians to hire international talent. And the truth on that is that Canada recognizes the need to bring international talent in order to become recognized as an innovation center in the world. And Canada's put a lot of focus on streamlining systems to enable efficient immigration processes. Now, Warren, I know you've pointed out with COVID, there's delayed processing times, but I think this is a speed bump. It really hasn't taken away from the fact that the process itself is still not cumbersome. It's something that any employer can take on and be successful in bringing international talent to their company.
Thank you, Brenda. And Louise, given that you have absolutely a lot of experience, both hiring and the ongoing engagement and employment of immigrants, how would you respond? What do you think is one of the biggest myths that people in your network might express around employing immigrants?
So I guess what I'd like to talk about a little bit is equivalency.
And you're on mute.
I tried to unmute, sorry. Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about equivalency of education and accreditations and so on. And, you know, education is getting to be more and more worldwide. We have people that study in universities all around the world, and they take part in conferences, in courses, in all kinds of international programs. So, you know, the education of somebody from a different country, maybe slightly different than they would get here in Canada, but you know, it's definitely not true that it is would be inferior or anything like that. And as far as accreditations go, you know, we make it a point to help our foreign employees gain their Canadian accreditations. So professional engineer status, professional geoscientists, aircraft maintenance engineers, and so on. All of those need specific Canadian accreditation, but it's something that's doable, and given a little bit of help, it helps our company to have more employees that are accredited. So it's, you know, it's something that's definitely worthwhile doing.
Louise, thank you. And thank you for raising that, because we do know that that for many employers in Canada, this notion of equivalencies and accreditation is one that is really, really challenging. And in Canada, we're particularly notorious for not necessarily accepting the equivalency of internationally attained experience. So thank you for raising that for us. Michaela.
Yeah, I have a quick answer for this one for Payments Canada, and probably a myth that, and I think someone said it earlier, I may have perpetuated in the past, but the notion of Canadian experience. So that's something that I often hear, and in fact at Payments Canada, the global experience is exactly what we're looking for. It's what we need. And there's an advantage of someone coming in with that perspective and not being boxed in the Canadian framework of how to operate systems. So they're coming with new ideas that have been tested and tried that we're not familiar with. So from that perspective, there's an advantage for us, and it's exactly the type of mindset and the experience we're looking for. So whenever I hear that Canadian experience, and certainly it's something that we talk about with our hiring managers, we need to look beyond that in many cases.
Thanks, Michaela. And following this up, we've already talked about that there's a broad recognition amongst sort of people in this room, I expect, today, and with economists and business organizations like the Ottawa Board of Trade, that economic recovery and growth are going to be dependent on fully utilizing and integrating the skills of immigrants going forward. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts beyond participating in a forum like this, and we're so grateful that you did, on what role employers can play in influencing a broader public understanding of the value of international talent in Ottawa. And maybe Michaela, I'll start with you and we'll go backwards again.
For sure, it's events like this, right, to share experiences, and for all of us, we have pretty broad networks. So it's to continually share the message within our own networks of the value and the experience of a diverse workforce and the positive experience that we've had hiring international talent. I would say it's almost grassroots as well. So it's starting with raising the profile of your international employees internally, and also broadening the awareness of your managers within your own organization. Because if you're not successful there, you're not going to be successful at attracting, because there's going to be a roadblock. So I think it really is, there's a grassroots element to this, to really encouraging the awareness, broadening kind of the education. and gaining the appreciation internally of what international talent can do for the company. In addition to that, as an example, we have a partnership with Rotman School of Business, and we've developed a business of payments program. And in fact, one of the discussions we have next week is the talent gap in payments. And one of the areas, the topic will be, the need for international experience and how do you tap in to the immigrant market and the value of doing that. So I think it's as much as possible sharing your experiences as an employer within your network, so that others can kind of, they feel more comfortable, and it will, hopefully spread the benefits as opposed to the myths that we were talking about.
Thank you, Michaela. Louise, how would you respond in terms of what role do you think that businesses and employers have in terms of advancing the messaging around the value of immigrants?
Yeah, so, well, certainly I agree with Michaela about continuing the internal practices and making sure that all the things that we do within our company continue, and that's really important. And other than that, we do try and take advantage of what is available, for instance, by recruiting through different agencies that are there particularly for immigrants. So by using those agencies and so on, that I think is important. I mean, they need clients like us and we need them. So I think that's really important.
Thank you, Louise. Brenda, what role do you think that businesses and employers can play in enhancing the understanding of the importance of immigrant inclusion?
Well, I think it definitely starts with spreading the word in events such as like this, and any forums that employers are involved in. We are involved in a lot of speaking opportunities at trade shows and technology forums, and often those speakers are our international hires. So it's very important to give them exposure and to continue to show the value of hiring immigrant workers. Not only do these immigrant workers provide value in the work they do directly, but they also are the mentors and set up the training programs for people we hire internally. And I think it's also spreading that word that we actually create more jobs locally by bringing in subject matter expertise because of that expertise that we bring to the community.
Thank you so much. Warren, how would you encourage the business clients that you work with to sort of more broadly champion this messaging and this issue? And you're on mute.
Okay, sorry for that. Thank you for taking me off mute. There's a learning curve, definitely, to using the temporary foreign worker program or transitioning a graduate, an international student graduate, onto a postgraduate work permit, and beyond that onto permanent resident status. So there is some tedium necessarily. There's a bureaucracy that has to be engaged. There are forms, there's information, there's supporting documents. So employers need to be encouraged, mentored, nurtured to understand that process, because it can appear at least to be bewildering. At the first instance, there is this sort of barrier or hurdle of documents, forms, information, government approval, government largesse, and so forth. So I can understand how small employers who don't yet have the positive experience of having gone through the program, and then the reward of having it succeed, and the loyalty that can come from recruiting such a worker, would be bewildered by it. They would find it difficult, often so challenging, as to think that, oh my God, I'm the employer, I know what I need. I should just be able to get this work permit or this permanent resident visa for this important recruit I want to make. So there can be an underestimation of what's involved. There can be some frustration, but if you work to manage those expectations, and you know, it's understanding is necessarily obviously incremental. It has been for all of us to get to this point in our own careers. So it's going to be the same way using the immigration programs and their multifacets to find a pathway that is the solution. But what I found is small to medium-sized employers that commit with patience and courage to the outcome, they have a positive experience. They like it. It works for them. It takes effort and time and understanding, but if they're willing to do that or assign a champion to nurture that to happen, then the first one's difficult, the second one's easier, the third one, it becomes more and more routine. And as the other speakers have mentioned beforehand, if they can be the mentors in the company for the newcomers, it doesn't matter which country they've come from, even for the local recruits and hires, it's such a fabulous, it can be such a fabulous experience with new cultures, new customs, new language, life can have more meaning. It can be more impactful and the company can be more successful if we embrace it rather than be fearful of it or resist it, because it's happening. It's coming. If it hasn't already arrived, it's coming. And the sooner we learn it, the sooner we share best practices with each other, the better off will be the outcomes, the better, the less the mitigation of the frustrations and the failures. So this forum, as others have said, and is incredible that we can network and speak about best practices and help each other out today and beyond is really the pathway forward.
Thank you, Warren. And while I do have some other questions that I've got in my hat for our panelists, I wanted to take this time as we're rounding out the end of the first hour of the event to open up the floor actually to questions from our audience. So we do have Q&A, and you can, as mentioned earlier, if you've got your video on, you can either raise your hand, you can use the reactions to raise your hand. We'll try and I'll try and see you. Lorena is moderating the chat and she can be looking for questions in there. If you've got questions, does anyone have a question for any of our panelists?
We have
Natalia.
Natalia.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to ask question. My question will be to Warren. Warren, I really liked everything you talked about, and my question would be regarding immigration and specifically regarding labor market impact assessments, and if government is planning to simplify the process for employers who are dedicated to bring skilled immigrants to Canada, specifically to Ottawa. Why I'm asking is just because recently I went through this process myself, and it was really lengthy, complicated for my employer, but hopefully they were dedicated to keep me in Canada. But I know that for many other employers, it is a huge struggle, and many of them just not ready to invest that much time and resources to actually bring on board somebody who is required to run the business. So do you know anything regarding this issue and what employers can potentially do to maybe tell government what we need and what will make our lives easier?
Great question. And I'm very sympathetic, Natalie, to what you've said. The Trudeau campaign, before he was first elected, promised to reform the temporary foreign worker program to make it easier. They have done only one thing, and that is to say they removed the 4-year cap on the temporary foreign worker on a work permit. Okay, so there is no longer any cap of 4 years or any other year in terms of the duration of a work permit. So that's good. That was easy. But they haven't done what all too many of us, yourself included, want them to do, and that is to say, to reduce the burden on employers as part of the labor market impact assessment process. So they haven't modified that at all. in 5 years. And the Conservatives built the bar up so high, and which has now still been in place since these 5 years. So I mean, there's some lobbying that needs to be done to get the government to understand the burdens placed on your company and other companies like it to go through the LMIA process. We don't like it as lawyers and counsel to companies or individuals. We only go through the LMIA process as a matter of last resort. If there's no other program that we can use to circumnavigate the LMIA process. So that's the, and in a further answer, I have not heard, not that I would, because the government is usually very secretive about policy changes that they will make. So I have not heard, and I go to conferences all the time of the Canadian Bar Association where senior program managers come and speak to us about these things. And we lawyers we tell them how difficult it is. And we tell them, you know, show us some love. This is bad. Come on, fix it, make it easier. So they haven't yet done that. It would be awfully nice if they could, because that would be an instrument that would help the numbers that the top line numbers that they're trying to achieve. All I can say is that it's a competitive environment. The unemployment rate is higher now, so the burden to get an LMIA is much higher than it ever was. So the advertising, the recruitment process has to be perfect before you'll get an approval pursuant to that program. So be super, to all of us on this webinar, please be super careful about your advertising campaign and make sure that it is at least, if not over the top, compliant with the requirements of the program. What I'm seeing though is the ones that are getting approved, they're being approved a lot quicker, Natalie. So it used to take 5 months, 4 months to get an LMIA approval. Now I'm seeing them in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So as long as the application is full, thorough, complete, compliant, I think employers are being rewarded with approvals that are qualified.
Thank you, Warren. Thank you very much. It really helps. And yes, I can agree. The process takes 2 weeks right now because I can tell it from my personal case. Yeah. But thank you.
Good.
And thank you, Natalia, for your question. Lorena, have we got other questions in the queue?
Not at the moment. Just a quick reminder that you can either raise your physical hand or virtual hand or your thumbs up. And we have Leanne. Leanne wants to say something. Or Leanne, or you were clapping, I'm not sure.
Yes, well, I couldn't find the hand raise emoji, so I just picked the clap. I figured it was close enough.
Go for it, Leanne.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks everyone for everyone's insights today. I do have to give a particular thanks to Warren, who actually helped me with my own immigration process successfully, as I am now here in Canada. So thank you very much for that. I'm curious to hear, so we talked a little bit about the postgraduate work permit and how international students can use that as a pathway to stay for permanent residency. I was reading a newspaper article this morning about how I guess part of that process is that the student needs to have work experience during that sort of 1 year post-grad time in order to continue on to the application part of permanent residency. And they had interviewed someone who said, you know, because of COVID and because of the lack of jobs, it was really hard to fulfill that. And so a lot of students who graduated, whether in December or May of this past year, were looking at sort of running out of options, running out of time to be able to stay in Canada. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of whether that might sort of hinder our ability to keep those international students here in Canada, and whether there are things being talked about, solutions to sort of extend that given the unemployment that has happened as a result of COVID.
Leanne, thank you for your question. And I'm going to just check in with Dave, and you may not, I don't want to put you on the spot, you may not have any response to that from Algonquin. And if not, by all means, I'll open it up to our other panelists as well. But any thoughts on, you know, facilitating the pathways for those international students to access employment?
Don't really have anything. I retired just prior to COVID, so I'm about 8 months out as far as what's been happening with international students, and anything I've got is hearsay from my colleagues. So sorry, so hopefully someone else can answer.
Not at all, and sorry again to put you on the spot there. Leanne, I understand that some of the rulings around international students are changing really rapidly. Warren, did you have any more on that?
Being highlighted by Leanne is the Express Entry Program and one subset of it called the Canada Experience Class. So our immigration programs give a considerable point advantage to anyone who's got an educational credential in Canada, and then beyond that, Canadian experience, work experience at a skilled level. So during COVID and higher unemployment, it's very difficult to get that second feature, the Canadian work experience, for at least 1 year, because 8 months won't be enough, 10 months won't be enough, 11 months, even 12 months less a day. The program criteria is so rigid that 12 months less a day is not going to give you any credit for 1 year of Canadian work experience. That's how rigid are and defined the programs are. So I haven't heard any discussion amongst my colleagues or governments about reform in this area that would accommodate this kind of situation, which is unfortunate. They can extend their status in Canada for sure as a visitor. You're entitled to a postgraduate work permit of up to 3 years. So hopefully such people that might be trapped right now have work permits that are valid for 2 years, and they could possibly get the 1 year of work experience that they need in the second year. But short of that, the program criteria have not been reformed. The point system has not been reformed. It is as it is. I like the description of the challenge because there's plenty of people who would make amazing immigrants that are falling through the cracks and the gaps all the time. Throughout every day of my job, I see worthy candidates for which we're trying to find, a needle in the haystack, a solution. Sometimes such solution comes to us. Other times there needs to be some drastic action, like going back to school, unfortunately, to get, enroll in another program, to get the study permit to stay here. And that's a frustration. That's a huge cost, of course, to them. That's a setback. It's a burden. But the criteria are today as they were a year ago. And it's on the Minister of Immigration to hear these kinds of concerns and to come up with remedial policies and legislation that would accommodate a solution for such a great candidate. And it wouldn't be, that there might only be 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 people. That sounds like a big number, but compared to Canada and our need, it's a tiny number. And these are great candidates who will do well as the economy recovers.
Thank you, Warren. Lorena, do we have other questions?
Yes, Karen from Bank of Canada. She has a very good question. Buddy systems and remote social chats were mentioned. So the question is for our employer panelist. Are there any other things your company has done to help integrate temporary foreign workers to the company who were onboarded virtually and are working from home?
And I would maybe add to that, Lorena, that the question probably applies to permanent workers as well, right?
Any immigrant
workers.
Mm-hmm.
Do any of our employers want to leap in on that?
I could step in a bit on that, or some other things that we're doing. One of the most important things, even before the COVID lockdowns, were making sure people understood the environment they were moving into. Real estate, options, schooling, how our healthcare system works. And we put out information packages early on. It's even more important with COVID that they understand the changes to those. They come in virtually and it's hard to get out to the organizations to understand, what does that mean for my children when they go to school? Do they have to go to school? What options do I have? And so we're sending out information packages to everyone who comes on board to help them in deciding which areas are best for them to live in, how the schooling systems work, how the health systems work. And I think that is something else you could do to help integrate your people.
Thank you, Brenda. Do Louise or Michaela want to add to that?
I'll add. I would agree with Brenda, and we're doing similar, sharing information to help our newest employees really integrate into the community, especially in light of the COVID situation. The buddy system is really important in certainly before COVID, but now even more so in a remote world. The other neat thing that we did, and we really didn't know how it was going to turn out, but when COVID hit, and of course it was unexpected, we launched what we called a quarantine, and it was meant as a virtual framework to provide support for our employees, to share stories, to write personal stories and share about their personal situations, celebrate their diversity. And it was intended really to provide kind of a shared learning and a remote support structure. And what it actually did, we had some really personal and touching stories from employees who were facing racism, Chinese employees who were facing racism during COVID, that were sharing their experience in these stories, about immigrants who were away from their family and still are, and how they're staying connected and how it's impacting them. And so it really, it kind of exploded, and it actually forced a lot of empathy across the organization and real appreciation for the diversity and for the challenges that their fellow colleagues were going through. So that was something that, and it's still something we use today, and that our employees are actively kind of sharing and populating.
Thank you, Michaela. Louise, I know you haven't been hiring, but can you talk to us a little bit about, similarly, do you think that there are any particular challenges that your international, your immigrant colleagues are experiencing, and how are you addressing those?
So I guess what I wanted to talk about was a couple of years ago, this was before COVID, some of our employees actually suggested they would like to start up a mental health committee. And this is something that we encouraged, and the mental health committee has been very active in the last number of months. And aside from sending out information to all employees, of course, not just to immigrants or new Canadians, but to all employees. And part of the thing, some of the things they're doing are highlighting what is available through our health benefits plan. So the employee assistance plans. And I didn't know this, but apparently our employee assistance plan, you can get, you could talk to people in 154 different languages. So who knew? I'm learning stuff from our mental health committee as well. So they've been very, very active.
Thank you, Louise. Lorena, do we have another question?
I don't have any other question in the chat, neither. I see Natalie McLaurin, she has a question.
Go ahead, Natalie.
Hello. I couldn't find I'm clapping, I guess, but anyways, couldn't find another reaction to put there. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate listening to all the comments. This is not a question as much of, I guess, a comment. So being in a school board, so we're Ottawa Carleton District School Board, and you hear everywhere that there's shortages of teachers, that kind of thing. And I guess, you know, and I guess it's just a thing we do in Ontario. We like to have, you know, colleges of things. So we have the College of Teachers, we have the College of Early Childhood Educators. And I find that in a way, they can be sort of barriers in a way for people who could be educators in other countries who want to come to Ontario to teach, but we have to send them through the College of Teachers. They have to go through whatever, you know, steps they have there. And I think the requirements for paperwork, the requirement for, you know, what your teaching degree over here is an equivalent to a teaching degree here. They end up having to go back to school to take courses. And so I think in a way, that is a bit of it's difficult for teachers to come to Canada for K-12 at least, and they end up in either post-secondary or they end up in doing other work, while they try to recertify, which, it always in my lifetime of work and dealing with HIO and things like that, it seemed there was a program some time ago, but it disappeared. And
no, thank you.
College of
Thank
ECE.
you. Thank you for raising that, Natalie. And you're speaking to an ongoing, and we touched on this a little earlier when we talked about foreign credentials and international experience. But one of the challenges that continues to bedevil both employers and international talent is in regulated professions in Canada. And depending on the province and depending on the actual profession, headway gets made or doesn't get made, or gets made and then, I think you referenced bridge training programs start up and then they go. So this does continue to be an issue here. I don't know if any of our employers wanted to talk about, particular challenges, again, related to international experience or credentials. Any further thoughts on that? No. Thank you, Natalie, again, for raising it. We just have a few minutes left in our session this afternoon. If there are any more questions, by all means, we would hear them. And otherwise, I'm going to actually invite Lorena to talk a little bit about evaluation, something that she'd like our participants to deal with. Lorena.
Thank you, Kelly. And before we do that, I hope that you don't mind. We would love to take a photo of this event. So I'm going to ask Alejandro if you don't mind taking the photo. And if you don't feel comfortable, now, first of all, if you can, please turn on your video. But if you don't want to be in the photo, feel free to turn it off. So Ale, to you.
Thanks, Lorena. So I'm going to wait for everyone who wants to appear in the picture to turn on their cameras. Get comfortable and ready. And give me your best smiles. I'm going to be taking this picture in 3 seconds. So 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alejandro. And now, yes, I am currently sharing an evaluation. This is very important for us to hear from you, your feedback. I promise it's really short. It's less than a minute. So if you don't mind, go to the link that I'm sharing right now and fill it out. Otherwise, we're going to send the evaluation after the event today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you, Lorena. And I am going to wrap us up. We're going to stay live right until 3. So if anybody wants to chat, either via the chat room, or once again, if you think of a last minute question. But I did want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists for joining us today. A reminder that the link to the Mythbusters document is in the chat. By all means, you can take advantage of that. We will be sharing out a link to this video recording later for anyone who wants to make use of it. I heard so many terrific thoughts from our panelists today. Thank you, all of you, for being here. One of the big things that, of course, came out is that as we go into recovery, once again, international talent is going to be important to us. And this was made clear from all of you, not only just to meet talent demands, but increasingly how that experience and intelligence that is garnered in other jurisdictions will be necessary for us as we rebuild. And we talk about building better going forward. So we really appreciated those insights. I am grateful for the acknowledgement that all of us play a role, from lawyers and their clients to the employers to any of us who are looking at issues related to talent and again, rebuilding the country in general going forward, that using our voices to ensure that we're addressing myths that arise when we hear them and to talk about our own experiences is going to help to bring this, move forward the agenda on full inclusion of immigrants in our communities. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I want to thank my team for helping to make everything run so smoothly. We have events coming up always throughout the year. Keep an eye out on information to come about the Employer Summit, which will be taking place in March. We've got a working group meeting for employers in January that we're going to open up more broadly than just the working group membership. That's going to be, we're going to invite all of our immigrant serving organizations in Ottawa who we work with to present the programs and services that they have for employers in a really high level, brief way, so that everyone can have a bit of a better understanding on where to source immigrant talent in our community. And once again, as we go forward to opening. Thank you to Warren, Brenda, Louise, Michaela. I really appreciated your contributions today. Appreciated you taking the time. To our award-winning employers, thank you again for sharing what's been going on in your organizations, and a little bit of a shout out that we are accepting nominations for next year's Employer Excellence Award. So if you know organizations that are doing good and innovative work around employing immigrants, by all means, please feel free and encourage them, in fact, to look at the criteria. It's on our website. We're accepting nominations until December 10th. Once again, thank you, all of you. Feel free to stay for the next couple of minutes and chat amongst yourselves. Otherwise, we wish you farewell. And thanks again, OBOT. Thank you, Dave, for joining us. This was a great collaboration with the Ottawa Board of Trade. Karen, you really helped. Karen Butterfield's on the line, really helped to bring this along. Thank you as well for your support and your assistance. And have a great afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, people who are still with us and just departing. Thank you so much for being with us.